Hello everyone, my name is Ben Osbourne. I'm the editor-in-chief of Slam Magazine. This is sports designer Todd Radom. I want to thank Mitchell and Ness for having us here to their beautiful space, and thank all of you guys for coming out. I'm a lifelong sports fan, particularly baseball and basketball. Was lucky enough to start working at Slam in 1997. Right out of college. If you're familiar with Slam, you know, it's basketball, it's lifestyle, very heavily designed, and, you know, culture of sport, and it was a great place for me to be. We did a lot of stuff with Mitchell and Ness as early as 1999. Our most famous cover is over there, which is Allen Iverson wearing a jersey that we got from Mitchell and Ness. Right at the early stages of the first throwback wave. I think we helped Mitchell and Ness, they helped us, Allen helped all of us. So long history with the past store, with this space. We work with them on editorial, on advertorials, just a great partnership. And then my baseball, I got to do a book about the Brooklyn Cyclones in 2004, which Todd and I had a connection we didn't even really know about. This is about the minor league team in Brooklyn. In 2007, I became editor-in-chief of Slam. Last year, put out this book, which is about basketball shoes. This did very well. And so again, it's like sports, but it's fashion, it's culture, it's history, and that's kind of my background. Through Twitter, I started following this guy, Todd, who was always posting cool old pictures of logos or breaking out little facts about uniforms or fonts, and I just kind of ate it up. We started @messaging each other, and you know, next thing you know, we're meeting for a drink in Manhattan and just geeking out about sports and design. And you know, Mitchell and Ness was an obvious talking point because of all that they do. And one thing led to another, and you know, here we are. You know, so it's an honor to be in this public setting with Todd, and he built a nice little presentation for you guys. He's really the expert here. I'm kind of the moderator. I'm going to let him talk. I've got some questions for him, and then hopefully you guys will ask some questions too. So thank you all for coming out.
Yes, thank you all for coming out. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Mitchell and Ness, Lynn, putting this together. I'm going to go through these visuals in rapid fire succession because this whole thing is going to go pretty quickly. But you know, we're having a discussion about visuals, which is almost sort of a paradox. So we need some visuals to kind of whet the appetite and start things out. So I'm just going to go over here and run through these. This is the way to do this, and we'll begin what we're talking about. So here we are. Sports and Design, a love story, and it truly is. Ben came up with the title for this, and I think it made all the sense in the world. So why are we all here? And we're all this way. We are sports fans. And I always say this, sports fans are the most passionate brand loyalists on earth. I may like Starbucks. I took Amtrak here. I thought the service was great, but I don't have an Amtrak tattoo, and there's probably nobody who does. But when it comes to our visuals, uniforms, logos, these visual traditions often connect generations. Sports fans know their typography. And sports fans can take their enthusiasm over certain logos to a whole new level. But you have to applaud people for their passion. They know their jerseys, that's for sure. So, for those of you who are unfamiliar with my work, I just put together a very quick, down and dirty, cursory portfolio of some of the things that I've done. And I thought it was just perfect to lead with this because this sort of binds Ben and I together. This is
I skipped the part about Todd doing some work for us on the current issue, which you guys all have in your bag.
Right, so this is hot off the press, so here we are, and it's a really fun thing to work on. Some of the logos that I've done that you guys have seen, I've done a couple of Super Bowl logos. This particular baseball team from the West Coast, which you might have seen. I have done all-star game logos for the NBA, several of them for Major League Baseball as well. But so where does all this come from? And I think to reinforce the fact that, you know, we are all bound together by this stuff. This is a scorecard from a game I attended when I was probably 12 or 13 years old. And as you can see, I doodled all of these little logos in here. And it's a great illustration of the fact that what I do today, all these years later, really combines passion for design and for sports. And I've replaced a couple of these logos, and my work has appeared on the uniforms of every one of these teams all these years later. So it comes full circle. Real quick, graduated college from the School of Visual Arts in New York. I went into book publishing, and I was given book covers having to do with sports. And I eventually built up a good-sized portfolio, enough that I took it to Major League Baseball, to the NBA, got a foot in the door, and Ben, I thought you'd enjoy this. This is the first thing I ever did that appeared on a Major League uniform, and it was an odd one, 1993 Asian tour for the Dodgers. So you got to start somewhere. A couple of other things that you guys might have seen that I've done, including this Brooklyn Cyclones logo, another thing that oddly Ben and I are joined together by, World Baseball Classic. The first Washington Nationals logo, which was a toughie because it took a week and a half. Expos moved from Montreal. I did this on a laptop in a hotel in Boston during the 2004 World Series. I do a lot of commemorative logos. I've done something like 50 patches for various MLB clubs. My first Major League logo, the 1994 version of the Milwaukee Brewers, long since gone. I've done tons of stadium openings. Tiger Stadium, Busch Stadium opening, closing, Yankee Stadium opening, closing, Shea Stadium final season. Just tons and tons of these. I have a real love of history. A WNBA team, and it's amazing to me because this has never changed 16 years after I did it. And just a couple of real quick examples of the fact that some of the logo work that we talk about goes beyond logos, goes beyond uniforms, goes to events that maybe people don't often associate with this kind of stuff. Did all of these Kia Performance Awards for the NBA a few years back. Visible but not real visible. Here's something that's kind of interesting because of where we are, and of course Mitchell and Ness being the epicenter of throwbacks and of heritage. In 1992, MLB called me to clean up art, go acquire art, and eventually put it together in a form for licensees such as Mitchell and Ness. And back then, this is before Macs by a couple of years, before computerization, did it on paper, all actually drawn. As I said to Lynn Bloom a little bit earlier, I still have some of the actual drawings for these things from back in the day, and they were put in a luscious binder and made available to business partners. Now it's all done via a password-protected style guide online, and so part of what I do is the fact that I've been researching and digitizing and lovingly rendering past logo and uniform decorations and headwear decorations, really for the better part of a quarter century. I also did this with the NBA a good 20 years ago. And I still do it on an ongoing basis for minor league baseball. So it's really kind of a different kind of deal. So where does this bring us? It brings us full circle to wrap up this visual part of the presentation to this place right here, right now. So I included some Philadelphia graphics, which I thought were pretty cool. This well-worn Dick Allen batting helmet from the mid-'60s for the Phillies. Look at that. A letterhead from the Phillies from 1903 with William Penn in there. A Philadelphia Athletics logo from probably the mid-1910s. My favorite warm-up of all time just speaks to a certain place in time right here, 1976. A Phillies program cover from 1938 with William Penn up there. A Philadelphia Eagles style guide from 1972 when they still wore white helmets. And of course, one of the great modern, kind of timeless but modern logos in professional sports, the very underrated Philadelphia Flyers logo. And finally, a Wilt Chamberlain Warriors jersey from the early 60s. Just beautiful block lettering. So thank you, Mitchell and Ness. And here we go. Let's have our conversation.
Great stuff, Todd.
Thank you.
Very, very cool.
It's fun putting it together.
You know, you talked a lot about the changes from, you know, maybe doing stuff by hand and on a table to now everything is digitized. Talk about maybe some of the advantages of that, but are we losing anything in terms of creativity or artisticness in our sports logos and design?
It's a good question, and I think it kind of speaks to, you know, any kind of technology in the modern world. It's here. It has great advantages because, of course, 20 years ago, if you wanted to come up with, let's say, several versions of something in color, you had to sit down for this stuff. It was this painstaking, almost artisanal process. Now, if I want to pivot from orange to blue, you press a button. I think there's an amazing movement going on overall in design in which a lot of people are getting back to basics, doing lettering, drawing stuff out by hand, and then letting the Mac and Adobe Illustrator, which is our software of choice, really be a tool, the likes of which it should be, sort of not tail-wagging dog. So, you know, I'm very fortunate that I was sort of classically trained back in the old days, and I can combine those two sensibilities, which is kind of rare. Came around at the right time.
You mentioned, I mean, clearly the sports fan has a level of connection with look and logos that is really unlike any other consumer. The other, I mean, you clearly were a sports fan. That's an amazing story with the scorecard. From your knowledge, the other Todd Radoms out there, do they tend to be sports fans also, or are there designers out there that don't care a bit about sports and are just designers, and you know, how does that impact the work that they do?
You do have both. You do have both. You have people who are fanatical about it to the point maybe where it clouds their judgment, because at the end of the day, as special as this stuff is, you know, you got to put your head down and make it happen and not overthink it. And I'm always a big proponent of the fact that perfect is the enemy of good. But on the other hand, I know a few designers who will text me and say something as simple as, what's another word for outfield wall? Fence. What's a euphemism for second base? Second sack, whatever. So, you know, we come in all shapes and sizes. It's true.
How high does this stuff get? Like, you know, you've done work for MLB, the NBA. I mean, did Bud Selig or David Stern, like, you know, was he CC'd on an email? Did he look at what you did, or is it all a matter of delegation? Like, how much do the leagues and the powers that be there appreciate the value and the importance of the look of their franchises?
Oh, it's interesting because I think every league and every team has its own personality and its own priorities and a certain hierarchy. Certainly, the colors of the trucking company that the previous owner, Drayton McLean, employed. So that's something very personal. You want to like get out with that stuff. Anyway, to your point, there's a process that goes through the leagues. The leagues serve, generally speaking, as sort of a liaison to ownership in certain cases. In other jobs, you go right through the owner. But
so the team, for the most part, the league defers to the team owners.
Yeah, absolutely. At the end of the day, it's their product, and as long as it meets the standards of, you know, being able to stand for a professional franchise in this case, it's going to sell merchandise, unless you come up with something that is horrifyingly inappropriate, which I really can't think of anything except somehow I think the Clippers might come up at some point in this conversation tonight, but that was kind of a brokered process. I had nothing to do with it. You know, that's what happens.
You were clearly not going to tell us the name or team of this owner, and I remember when we met for drinks, and it's not something you referenced here, like there's work that you've done that you signed NDAs on, and I mean, what is that? Can you explain that a little to these guys, and why would a league not want it top? Why is there work you've done that you can't show us or tell us that you did?
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of what I do and what I've done over the years, I mean, I'll put it right out there, Major League Baseball does not, like, you know, makes people like me sign these airtight agreements that they will come and, take my children away if I speak in public about but some things are okay to talk about. It's a very weird thing, and it ebbs and flows into part of the process. The NFL never used to care about this stuff. The NBA never used to care about this stuff. I will say that I just spent last weekend working with the New York Mets and developing their National League Champions logo. I could talk about that, no problem. It's going to launch on Friday. It's, they're just sensitive to it.
What are they? I mean, I don't want to. I feel like I sound ignorant, but like, what are they scared is going to happen?
I don't know. I'm ignorant about it too, and it's always been this way. I think when you have organizations that are run, any lawyers in the room that are run by lawyers, you're going to get gunked up bureaucracy and people telling you what you can't do, as opposed to a culture which tells you what you can do. And listen, I can't. They've been good partners to me for years and years and years. So it's one of these is what it is situations.
If you go on the 4 major team sports leagues in this country, and there is a little MLS section down there, which I'm very happy to see. But if we talk about baseball, basketball, football, and hockey, both from the fan side and the business side, I mean, could you rank them in terms of like where look matters the most, where it's respected the most?
Yeah, I think it ebbs and flows. I mean, in the case of, you got a smile on your face. Yeah. I mean, in the case of the NBA, certainly Adidas has kind of taken over things in large part over the years. They used to have a very strong internal design department in Secaucus, and that hasn't existed in a while. In the case of Major League Baseball, you have a creative department that has exercised sort of, this sort of caretaker role of being stewards of the visuals of the game in a very defined way. I think you have that at the NHL as well, and the NFL is just this gigantic design department which really is sort of somewhat decentralized. But these things ebb and flow depending upon who is hiring this stuff out. I think when it comes to the fans, their expectations for each of the leagues and sort of like the visual culture of each of the sports is quite different, and I think that the people who are in a position of determining what this stuff is going to look like are extremely respectful, I think, in every case of those dynamics. I really do. I think that every team and every fan base has this sort of visual DNA. And sometimes that visual DNA can pivot. In the case of the Atlanta Hawks, who went for this, pretty radical look. There are pieces from their past which, they came up with and they built a story around. But in the case of the Atlanta Hawks, this has been a franchise that's never won an NBA championship. If you are going to, some jobs are teardowns and some jobs are kind of fixer-uppers where you dabble around the edges. In the case of the Hawks, this clearly was kind of a total teardown. How this ages, I think, is going to be fascinating because it may well look, and I said this earlier, I think the Bucks, in its plainness, is going to look like 2015 in 2018. I think that there's sort of this, very spare, almost hipster dynamic to it that I think is going to look dated soon. But that said, what the Hawks did, went way, way, way out there, and it's going to be fascinating to see how it plays. And let's face it, part of this is predicated upon the success or failure of the team. People associate uniforms with a moment in time that is, usually the Houston Rockets. Great case in point, right? Change the uniforms up in 94 or 95, whatever it is, and coming off a championship, right? It was like, what the hell is that? Yeah. And they go out and win a champ. So, part of it's dumb luck.
I care enough about this stuff where every single person in here, their opinion on what their favorite logo or uniform is would be interesting to me, but we're going to give you special power as someone who does this for a living. I mean, what are your favorite looks? At minimum, maybe just say one. One per sport.
Yeah, I'm sort of a traditionalist at heart, and I'll rifle off a couple. Including some new ones, because I think if everything was old, it would be really boring. And so just among new ones, I love the Charlotte Hornets. I love what they have done. I love the fact that it harkens back to the original Hornets. It kind of like kicked it into the 21st century a little bit, but it retained that DNA, the teal, the purple. I think it's really well rendered. I like the uniforms. I love the Montreal Canadiens. I love what they stand for. We talked about hockey jerseys. Hockey jerseys or sweaters are just awesome. because of stripes. You got all this, as hard as basketball jerseys are and uniforms are designed, a hockey jersey is like this blank canvas with the greatest paints in the world at your disposal, right? You're supposed to just glom it on and just make it happen. So, and also culturally, the Montreal Canadiens, they stand for something, right? It's a pretty awesome thing. Let's see, baseball, I mean, I'm kind of close to it because I've done so much work with baseball over the years. I'm a Red Sox fan, even though I grew up 10 miles north of Yankee Stadium. It's a whole other story. How can you not love the Detroit Tigers? How can you not have respect for the Yankees, if not love, and, in football, that's a really interesting thing. I mean, I think that, you gotta love the Raiders because it's just so spare and timeless. But then again, there's something kind of exciting about what Nike did with the Seahawks that sort of fits that place and time, and they win a Super Bowl in it, and there's the good stink rubbing off on it. Let's face it, the Raiders are never going to change because of the Raiders, right? The Patriots have sort of a modern classic, and that's baked into the equation because of the fact that they've been so successful, love them or hate them. That uniform and that helmet is associated with this era of excellence, and it's probably not going to change anytime soon. The Steelers, anybody else I hate the Steelers numbers, right? The italicized sans serif numbers, just sort of like on this powerful, I don't know, I'm kind of like digressing in a lot of ways. But, so what I'm trying to say is you have this, I said, tail wagging dog scenario where we're talking about what the needs of fans and franchises are and what the fans want rather than what the apparel companies want.
Yeah, but they're paying so much money.
That's a fact.
I'm sure when Nike takes over the NBA, there's going to be a whole new set of changes to the technology of the jersey, but also the look. I'm sure they will revamp a bunch of teams.
Yeah, absolutely.
For better or worse.
Yeah, I mean, there are even some templates of uniforms, like you see a team like the Dallas Cowboys, which is substantially the same uniforms they've had for years and years and years, but with that Nike collar, right, the flywire thing, it just stands out to me in a big way. So.
Well, we have a room presumably of mostly Philadelphians. Before we open it up to all of you guys, I just spend a minute or two on the looks of these teams. I mean, I think some pretty consistent. I mean, I happen to despise the Eagles with passion. As a Giant fan, I'm kind of indifferent to the Sixers and Phillies and don't really care for the Flyers, but total respect for the look of kind of all of them. And what's your kind of professional take on these franchises?
Let's start out with the newest, which is the Sixers. And the Sixers, I love what they've done this year. And it's right. It's right for Philadelphia. I walk around Center City. I've got Philly friends. And it seems right. It almost seems, sometimes you'll see teams kind of, and certainly in regard to the Sixers, the AI era where they went to, black and gold and silver and this kind of stuff. It's almost like they had to go out and have this little dalliance with this weird stuff, and it kind of came back to it, and it's such a good, clean look, and there's nothing, it's solid. It speaks to Philadelphia, which is this very solid, workmanlike place in our minds, right? The Phillies are kind of interesting to me, because the Phillies, of course, have had their current look since 1992. They have had enough down years in that look, certainly currently what's going on. And yet, they won the World Series in 2008 with that look, went to the World Series in 2009. You can't change red. I grew up at the time, at a time when the swirly P and the racing stripes, and they were still in maroon. There are great stories that franchise can tell, and does tell very well. But it's a solid look, and they're going to do, they're stepping out a little bit this coming season and doing something interesting.
Yeah.
The Eagles.
Wait, what?
I can't talk about that. The cone of silence would have to descend upon all of Center City. We were talking about this before. The midnight green is kind of played. How do you feel about that?
What on that the
Eagles
wear?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a very dead color for a vibrant television age.
I like that Eagles jersey.
That's a good look.
That's Randall, and the bird on the side was pretty cool.
Yeah, and the Harold Carmichael that we talked about before.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a more vibrant. I think teams that are
current Eagles now does seem a little forced.
I mean, I'm just staring at that rack right there, and let's face it. Any of us who are sports fans, which is probably everybody in this room, you go to a live event and you are surrounded by LED lights that are just vibrant, and it really speaks so well to the kind of like pageantry and passion of sports. We always talk about color being this touch point thing that like it's tribal, you know, like they're green and you're blue, like, you know, like this, right?
Yeah.
What is that color? That's one of the reasons, by the way, that I really get down on the Padres, Brown, the clamoring for Brown to come back. It's like Brown is a UPS guy. Brown is not LED lights, and Brown is not about, you know. And anyway, last but not least, the Flyers to me are a, you know, I said it before, a modern classic. Such a stepping out from, you know, in 1967, the Flyers start. They're not red, white, and blue like every Philly team. It's a great, like, you know, in hockey it's all about the crest, and that is a classic crest. They tried to crap it up over the years. They added chrome to it. They added outlines to it. It came back to basics, and it just tastes good, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that, as it is, what they're wearing tonight is basically what they wore when they started.
As it should be, I think.
Awesome. Well, Todd, thank you very, very
Great
much.
questions, Ben. Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you guys all for listening. We definitely were hoping that people here would want to chime in with questions or comments. It's such a personal thing that even if it's just an anecdote about why you like a certain uniform or look, I think it's totally relevant. So
Yeah, and we got some good looks in the room too.
yeah.
Green Devils back there.
So just if you want to say anything, raise your hand.
Yeah, let's start right here.
You talked about designing the graphics and the logos. Do you get involved with, you know, there's so much more to a jersey with the contrasting stripes and the materials and the construction.
Well, not so much
Do you have
materials.
any input in that?
Yeah, the trim, but not the materials. I mean, you know, the materials are kind of baked in, especially in baseball. Majestic, they have their cool base thing. But, you know, when you talk about moving trim off a sleeve, abutting a sleeve, what we call soutache trim on a baseball jersey, yeah, I get involved with that stuff
Okay.
more often than not.
Because that's all part of it, obviously.
Yeah, it really is. And when you think about it, you know, a logo is a, you know, at its core, a you know, corporate symbol. More than that for us. But how does that distill down to all these other elements, and how do all these other elements get activated in the real world? What's this stuff going to look like in terms of environmental graphics in the stadium, on jerseys, on caps in the case of baseball? Everything kind of like, it's a suite of assets, and it all distills down from this core, you know, core piece.
Does the fact that you or other versions, other people like you, do so much work for teams mean that, I mean, does a team have an in-house designer or not really?
They do, but those people are usually besieged with just stuff. They're assembling season ticket material or gifts for, you know, suite holders or signage for the ballpark. I mean, you know, I got a tour of, around Labor Day, the Mets creative department took me around, and every one of those people was just like, you know, triage. They're doing triage of just reacting to things that are of the moment, whereas logo and uniform design are a year and a half out.
Got it. So they don't have, they're too in that to.
They're living in the moment,
Yeah.
and they're you know, they're doing surgery.
Got it.
My question's about typography. Do you mostly do your own customized typography, or are you using like packaged like fonts you find? You know.
I do it all.
Yeah.
You know, you start with a rectangle, you tilt that rectangle, you've got an I, and all of a sudden you got a T. So yeah, I do it my own, and I'm a big typography guy. I always have been. I made a living doing hand lettering, as I said, back before computerization. So letter forms are really near and dear to my heart. And I've actually done several fonts for teams also, which is an interesting thing. It's like really getting into the trenches with this stuff. So yeah.
Thank you.
Have
Yeah.
you ever created a font that then became like available to buy for?
No.
No. Just
No, I've done it for internal.
Got it.
I did a font for the Mets, which like a script font. So just imagine designing a script font where the end of every letter has to meet the beginning of the next letter. It's crazy. It tested my patience, skills, just nuts. And so it's a keyable font that they utilize in-house.
Got it. And only they have the right to use it.
Yeah, they Major League Baseball licensees, you know.
Good.
When teams, when they change their design, when they change their uniform, their logo, and they have press conferences, do you ever attend those? press conferences?
Well, it was kind of
Or
like
just
that.
a person in a room?
Yeah, I mean, that speaks to like what Ben was saying, that sometimes, they don't like putting a name out there, but sometimes they do. And one of the great things, I did the logo, like I said earlier, for the Basketball Hall of Fame, and they had this press conference with the mayor of Springfield, and got to go into his office. It sounds like The Simpsons, I know, but I was introduced, and it was really cool. It was really cool. So sometimes, yeah, and it's always very gratifying because of the fact that, like I was saying earlier, I work on this stuff so far in advance. You kind of forget what it's all about, and then when it launches, it's like, you've raised this child in rapid fire fashion, and all of a sudden that kid graduated college and they're off in the world. So, thank you.
My first question is for both of you guys. I just was curious, like, what's your favorite logo or uniform of a defunct team? And then,
Good question.
my other question is, for you, Todd, you look at, like Major League Baseball, the NBA, all the crazy rules in the NFL, like everyone's pretty much either traditional or there's like even with like ballparks, there's a call for like throwback, you know what I'm saying? What do you think will happen with like outside of the Hawks and the Miami Marlins and the Clippers? Like, where do you see like the industry going maybe in the next decade?
Two great questions.
Yeah, that's a great.
Two great questions.
I write for Slam.
Yeah.
Yes,
Listen.
Anthony is Slam fan for a
Oh,
long
so
time.
you know. All right, so if I can address that last question, because I want to.
Yeah,
I have
that's
this
a
theory.
perfect question.
I have this theory that right now we have been living in hard economic times in this country for almost, 8 years, almost a decade, right? Consumers want comfort food. We want chicken pot pie and grilled cheese sandwiches. And so when it comes to sports, the Baltimore Orioles, going back to the Smiling Bird, is a big lump of mashed potatoes with a big dollop of butter in it. The Toronto Blue Jays, going to this, revised look, which I love. I think it's really good, because I think it speaks to everything good about what was, and just pushes it forward a little bit. That's a turkey sandwich with gravy, man. I think innovations can happen. It's hard to do innovation in baseball. It's easier in the NBA. I think, you're always going to have certain teams that push the envelope a little bit, and we always have. Dating back, 100 years ago, there was some teams were doing something revolutionary in MLB, right? The Los Angeles Rams in 1947, had a player paint horns on the helmet. It's like, whoa, what the hell is that? And now look, right? So it's a great, great question. I think you're going to have some outliers. We need to have some time to see what happens. How about defunct logos?
The Hartford Whalers for
That's
sure
going.
Yep.
is a classic. I was really into I was big on USFL actually, and can conjure almost all of those logos in my head. But my favorite was the Houston Gamblers.
Wow.
Those were just kind of like badass uniforms, and they had Jim Kelly, and they were running the run and shoot. So
USO was incredibly entertaining to watch. I was in college at the time, and I was fascinated by those uniforms.
they had some crazy. The Washington Federals were
Green and black.
The Oklahoma Outlaws were all black with Doug Williams at
Yeah.
quarterback.
Yeah. The Arizona Wranglers had like copper and purple,
Yeah.
almost like a precursor to the
It was
Diamondbacks.
a Denver Gold with the.
Yeah.
So
of course,
I said
Donald
the
Trump and
Whalers
New
and
Jersey
then all
Generals.
of the USFL.
Yeah. Well, I'll put in. You can't go wrong with the Hartford Whalers. Just like the most, and there was. I actually wrote a blog post about this earlier this year about these kind of like the Flyers logo. This was like the era of great corporate logos when you think about it. And there are some sports logos that emerged from this era that are sort of modern but timeless. The Minnesota North Stars, just really beautiful and simple, right? Hartford Whalers be another one. The Flyers, the Montreal Expos, so weird, and of a place and time. And I remember being a kid watching Mets games on TV, and it's like, what? They look like they were from a different country. It could have been from a different planet. So I would put them in the mix for sure.
The Expos and Whalers, I love when they can, when it's lettered, you know, it's HW, you know, the Expos had the M and the E. Like, I remember easily, well after I knew how to read and had tons of baseball cards, when I figured out that the Brewers was not just a glove, but it was MB. So, you know, bonus points for cool looking logos that also are, you know, secretly letters,
you know,
or not so secretly.
And I'll throw the turd in the punch bowl right now, because I replaced both the Expos, when I did the Washington Nationals, and the MB, which at the time was considered, they were a losing franchise. People called it a paw print, like a dog's paw print, and it was considered to be old-fashioned, and the team sucked in the early 90s, and it was like, out with the old, in with the new, everything old comes back again, more so now than ever.
Yeah, now they wear it at least a few times a year, right?
Yeah. That's a regular alternate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Funny.
How much back and forth is it usually when submitting a logo, or have you ever gotten it on one take?
Well, remember what I said earlier about the sausage being made? There's always sausage. For something significant, I think, you know, you bake it into the equation that there should be several rounds, at the very least, of give and take. There's so many stakeholders. They need to make sure broadcasters are on board with this stuff. They've got to test this. I mean, there are a lot of people with their fingers in this, so it really should have scrutiny. First impressions are usually the best, but it never happens that you start here and end up here. There's always something in the middle, and you know, it's part of the process, like I said. So sometimes that could go on for 4 months. If it goes for more than, let's say, 3 significant rounds of changes, something's wrong. There is some leadership that is not being exhibited in terms of pushing this stuff through. You almost need, you know, you need somebody who's going to get this at the 1 yard line and put their head down and make it happen. And you know, as long as it's always moving forward, it's important.
Earlier, you know, you mentioned, Todd, the comment about, you know, getting back to the days of sort of, you know, the mashed potatoes and the comfort food kind of idea. On the flip side of that, you know, you got Under Armour in the college space now, and they're doing 17 versions, you know, neon colors, and you know, they do these unveilings to throw on Vine, Instagram, and it's a recruiting tool, right?
Yep.
You know, so talking to that kind of reference of going the other way, in your design process now, working with the leagues and the teams, et cetera, are you being asked to come up with 600 versions of these logos to really push the envelope, you know, around, or are you, you know, given that comfort level to really narrow in on that iconic look and feel and design?
Well, I mean, I'll say that I get called on to impart a certain look. So, you know, so a couple of things. Number one, the Under Armour look and the dynamics of what's happening in the colleges right now are really super specific, and you call it, it's a recruiting tool, and it is geared toward 17-year-old recruits and to a very different kind of demographic. And again, in a case like Notre Dame can mix it up a little bit and add this, you know, I think pretty cool looking helmet into the mix. Navy a couple of years ago, right? Everything has a story. They can get away with that. And Oregon, as Ben said earlier, is sort of like, they are known for, you know, being agents of change. That's what they're known for. I think the professional franchises are a different story. There's more stability expected there. Quite frankly, the licensees are, you know, they can't have that many SKUs. They cannot, you know, there has to be some 3-year period of stability to 5-year period of stability where you commit to something, and the fan base expects it, I think. So anyway, no, I'm really, you know, I mean, sometimes you'll get asked to think about something and how it's going to evolve in rapid fire fashion, but I think, you know, you pretty much want to settle in with something and know that you're going to, I mean, who knows, I mean, you know, I did the Angels in 2001. I could never have imagined that it would, you know, I think it's aged pretty well. They won the World Series right out of the box. There's dumb luck, right? But couldn't have imagined that it would still be in play all these years later. So you just never know.
Yeah, you just mentioned the Angels logo. Could you talk a little bit about how you updated that from the traditional look to where you got to it, where it is now? Like,
well, you know, there was an interim look, which you might forget, which took in the 90s, the Mo Vaughn Angels with periwinkle, 6 different colors, 2 shades of gold, pinstripes, sleeveless uniforms, and it was, you know, it was a lot A lot going on there.
That was a terrible one.
Well, I mean, whatever it was of a certain time, and they were not successful. So, I think there was a desire to go back to, the comfort food situation, 15 years, a trend before a trend almost. It just made sense to go to that because of the fact that in the parking lot in Anaheim is this gigantic A with a halo. It's staring you in the face. They've shifted around a couple of times. And there was, a heritage there that made sense. Also, the story was that in the case of the Angels, red was Gene Autry's favorite color. He was no longer in the picture, but there was something to build a story around, and I will say it again. Sports is tribal when it comes to colors. In the LA market, of course, now they were the Anaheim Angels then, now they're strictly Los Angeles Angels. Well, the Dodgers are blue. Go to red. It speaks to intense rivalry. And, things were a little bit different then. Again, it was a long time ago. Stakeholders were far, very minimal presence on the internet then, that kind of deal. But, they've done a good job in terms of activating that brand and just hammering home that it's all about the A and the red. A, red, halo, boom, off to the races. And, it's strong.
Definitely, thank you.
Thank you.
You mentioned that the Washington Nationals, they gave you 7 days in which to do that. What's like the typical gestation period for a rebrand, like for the Brewers or the Angels?
It's not 7 days. Well, the circumstances there were extraordinary because the fact that the Montreal Expos were moving to Washington, the move was in play in the middle of the baseball postseason in 2004. There had not been a shift of an MLB franchise since 1971. So it was really uncharted territory. And something had to get done fast, and they unveiled the uniforms on November 11th. This was crazy. I mean, just unheard of. I've been involved with other rebrands for other leagues of teams that have moved. We talked about one earlier. I don't know how much I can talk about it publicly, but that was a fast mover, but nothing like that. Anyway, to your point, it should be a year and a half in advance. It's an 18-month time frame at the most. You have to file notice every league with regard to when that you're going to change. There's no turning back from this. You got to get people who are going to clean out their inventory, right? I mean, it's a process. When you think about stadiums, I had somebody tell me this past summer that their team rebranded and designing the stadium, all the graphics in the stadium, 3-year process. Can't do it in 1 year because the stuff is just everywhere. It's color, it's paint, it's metal, it's signage. I mean, it's interesting. You think about this, and it goes way beyond uniforms, T-shirts, and the very obvious.
I have 2 questions for you, Todd.
Yeah.
Have you ever turned down a job or not had time for a job where the ultimate logo that came out of that you really liked? Like you thought, I never would have got to that, that's really cool. And then the second part of the question is your favorite logo that you've ever done besides the Cyclones.
It's great. I have been, usually when somebody hires out a job like this, they'll hire a specific person to do this job. But there have been several cases where it has been a quote-unquote bake-off, that you are pitted in this death match against 3 other design firms, and you'll get paid to submit your first round, and who knows what comes out of that afterwards. And there are some jobs that have, that are bastard children of several parents, as I call them, where I might design the typography for something, but somebody designed the icon, and it gets glued together in Frankenstein. It's a great question. I'd have to give it some thought. Listen, I appreciate, and I know so many people who, it's a small world. We were talking about this before. I'd have to think about that. The second question was favorite logo, something like that. I love, as you can probably see, just very briefly, history. I'm a real aficionado of, again, just as evidenced by the fact that I was doodling this stuff and I saved this and I look back at that all these years later. I navigated a Super Bowl logo. And whether or not it's aesthetically my favorite thing in the world, I wouldn't say it is, but it's almost like it makes me bulletproof. I can go into a room and say, damn it, So, I mean, that's a big one. But there are but the Cyclones logo, which, you brought up, and we talked about it. It's a real favorite of mine for several reasons. It's not the most prominent thing in the world, but I think it holds up after all these years. I'm a New Yorker. It's got color, it's got history, it's got a real sense of place. It was almost like some jobs you're asked to do and you're like, what the hell am I gonna do? Mm-hmm. In that case, it was like, I'm gonna sink my teeth into this and I'm just gonna rip it apart and get on top of it. And yeah, it's, you know, that was it.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes, sir.
I have a question as far as, have you ever thought about doing a logo or a uniform outside of like a professional team, like maybe a college team or maybe a team that's not in like North America, like an overseas team? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I get every couple of times a year, I'll get like a request for proposal to put together something for a college. And it's almost like, I find it difficult to crack that code. It's a very different world. I could do it, I would love to do it, but I've never been asked to. And in terms of international, no, I've never had the opportunity. Never ever had the opportunity. I think it would be awesome to do a, you know, I always think about like Japanese baseball or something. Because, you know, this is a culture that, I don't want to say copycat culture because people, although it kind of is, you look at like the Tokyo Yomiuri Giants, they emulate the San Francisco Giants. I would love to impart a classic American baseball look for some Japanese team. If anybody knows how to make that happen, I'll gladly pay a finder's fee. That could be an awesome job. Or something like French. I mean, I have no idea. Great question. Yes?
Hi. I have a question more about like the design process and inspiration. Where do you pull inspiration from? Do the teams give you specific direction on these are the colors we want? We kind of want it to look like this, or do they give you complete freedom?
Yeah, I mean, every job is different.
Yeah.
Again, sometimes you will get like, you know, these are the colors we want to work with, but not all the time. I very seldom get a creative brief.
Oh.
Very seldom. So you're kind of like, okay, here is a, you know, 767. You know, we're going to Paris, fly it. So you got to work it out. And I'm a huge, gigantic believer in research, that every job begins with this discovery phase. Phase one, which is research, immersing yourself into the culture of a particular fan base, because, you know, you can do a logo for the Los Angeles Dodgers. That's a very different fan base from the Kansas City Royals or the Philadelphia Eagles and Dallas Cowboys, despite being rivals. And I think sports lives and breathes at a very local level, that if you don't reach, you know, if you give a generic something that just makes no sense for a particular market or fan base, it's just wrong. It's going to be, you're dooming yourself to failure. So that research stuff is really, really important. So I'll look at visuals, I'll look at stuff, I'll look at old programs, and, you know, I'll look at fan bases and I'll take into account the kind of the dynamics of a team. What, you know, always a question to ask, I think, which is really interesting. Teams, in particular, make a change for two reasons, typically. A change in ownership, which I talked about before, or to break an era of losing. Winning teams very seldom change, right? Almost never happens in the professional ranks. So what's the reason for this? Why are you doing this? And I think if you do get if you know what those answers are, and you know where to look for inspiration, you know, building up this kind of supporting document. I always talk about, it's almost like a piece of architecture. We're going to build a house together, okay? I want to build you a great house that if you want to paint it pink, you can paint it pink. You want to put shutters on it, you can put shutters. But it starts with a great foundation, and it starts with an unsinkable, unshakable foundation that anything can be built upon. So it's a very good question, and just hugely important, and you can't half-ass it.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you.
So customers are always right, and
Yes, they are.
the end game where a logo ends up, you might not always agree with that was the best option. Have you secretly kept options of logos that you preferred over where they ended up?
Oh, all right, so here's what I have. I have, from those pre-Mac days, I have like files of stuff. I have everything. I have an external hard drive that I used to, you know, burn a CD or a zip disc and then a DVD and whatever. So I have discs 1 through 57 in there. And every once in a while I'll go back to 1994 and I'll take a look at something. I'm like, look at this. It's 20 plus years later. It's inevitable, right? I mean, it's instructive to look back at that stuff because, quite candidly, more often than not, I'll look back at that stuff and kind of cringe and say, I didn't do all that foundation stuff carefully enough. Or, God, if I knew then what I knew now, or this looks of a certain time, it would not have aged well, that kind of thing. So, it's part of the process. We're creative people. We beat ourselves up and second guess ourselves, and it's just part of our DNA.
I got one last question. Just curious, just as a creative, would you say that, well, my question is, does success help your creativity or does it hinder your creativity? Like, were you better when you were hungrier?
No, I'm still hungry. It's not an easy living. I got 2 college educations to pay for, I always say. And I think that to your point, expectations get ratcheted up. If somebody hires me, especially not for a professional job, maybe it's some like lesser job. Ben, you hired me to do your NBA preview, right? If I, mailed that in, I think I felt a lot of pressure with that. I had a lot of fun with it, and I really didn't have any direction, which was awesome, right? But it was kind of like, well, what's expected of me? And I kind of feel like, I have a reputation after all these years that I've tried to maintain and, good business relationships with people and so forth. And I've had clients for a quarter century. And part of that is, integrity and sort of like brand integrity. And, if I want to position myself as Tiffany, you got to bring it every day. So it's a good question. Devils.
In the beginning of your career, did you have any major influencers or mentors?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, and here's my story. I am a 4th generation working artist. I'll start with the same generation. My brother is a professional photographer and very high-end retoucher. My dad was sort of a creative jack of all trades. He wrote at times, like copywriting. He was a graphic designer. He did like paste-ups and down and dirty advertising stuff. His father, my grandfather, who I recall very fondly, was a painter, a fine artist. He maintained a studio in their apartment in Manhattan, in the Inwood section of Manhattan, all the way uptown. I remember being a little boy and going down, and he had like stacks of reference, and he had a pipe that he'd be painting, and he made a living doing this. And his father, who I didn't know, was a sign painter, like commercial sign painter. I've got a cousin who's a very prominent jazz drummer. His parents were a sculptor and an actress. My niece, my brother's daughter, is a graphic designer, so she's 5th generation Radom. I've got creative, so I guess my answer is my role models were kind of all around me. My grandmother taught at Parsons in the 30s, so it was always like, I had this stuff around me from the time I was in the womb. It's unusual. Yeah.
Based upon what he said about the customer 9 times out of 10 always being right, when you design, is it more or less you're thinking what the customer is in need of, or based upon your skill set, more of what your gut tells you? Even with the colors and things like that.
I think, listen, they're hiring me for a reason. It's a collaborative process, inevitably. And I always do say this, design is not brain surgery in the sense that if I opt for orange instead of red, the patient's not going to die. It could be good, So design is humbling. It's any kind of creativity is humbling, right? So much of your success is predicated upon failure. I would liken it to if the greatest sports designer, whoever that might be, is Ted Williams. Ted Williams, failed 7 out of 10 times at the plate, 6.5 out of 7 times at the plate, out of 10 times at the plate. And, that's severe. I try to, it's almost like you don't teach to the test, you design to the client. And there's an ebb and flow in navigating that thing. And I think about it like riding waves. Don't get washed asunder. Why are they asking you to do a job? So, it's a lot of dynamics in play, and sometimes those dynamics are shifting on the move.
This is the question we've been waiting for.
Actually, I can't remember what the logo is for. It's a baseball with kind of a four-leaf.
The World Baseball Classic.
World Baseball Classic. So it has a little bit of a feel of both the unisphere and as well as the atomic structure.
Yeah.
In terms of the creative process, when you're going through research, is that something that you are specifically looking towards? So essentially kind of saying that it harkens this specific moment. Or are you looking at that and then working from it, or are you researching and just then moving forward, going with
Well, I think
what comes out?
it's important to point out, because of the fact that this work is going to be trademarked and utilized in so many different ways. It's got to be, first of all, original. It's got to be legally defensible, because if it doesn't get past legal, it's never going to see the light of day. So that was an interesting job because of the fact that, so it's the World Baseball Classic, something totally different. It was sponsored by Major League Baseball, but it involved different nations. And I was really inspired by sort of classic corporate design, looking at, Paul Rand and Milton Glaser stuff, and I was looking at Olympic marks at the same time. It had to be less about flourishes, banners, and ruffles and, tradition, able to translate into many languages, many cultures, that kind of stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
It is kind of but the unisphere is like so cool that, can't go wrong with that.
It has a feeling of UN unisphere.
Yeah,
like
well, it had a globe in it with the stitches of baseball, so
yeah,
there you go.
it's good news.
Yeah. Yeah.
Has there ever been a time where you thought about working for a single league or a single team? Like, you mentioned that you're a Red Sox fan. Ever thought of working exclusively for the Red Sox or exclusively for the NHL or MLB?
No, I mean, the opportunities never came up. I have worked by myself, for myself, for 25 years now, and you get used to being your own boss, and I like the variety, certainly. I do think that there's a time, and I've worked on collaborations with people many, many times, in terms of, being a retainer, that kind of a thing, but I've never gone all in that way. I could see doing it at some point in my life. And I've got probably, more years behind me than ahead of me in my career. I'm 51 years old, and I'm not going to be putting in 16-hour days 10 years from now, I'll tell you. After I get those 2 college educations paid for. But I think there's some value in working in-house, and I think I might like to do that at some point.
Being a Red Sox fan, would you secretly want to change the logo, or
well,
keep it as is? Because that's one that's basically has never changed.
No, you can't. You can't. I mean, it's just, it would be wrong. It would be almost like, no, you can't do that. And I've done a lot of work for the Yankees over the years, to which I always say, like, what an ironic thing that they're putting food on our table, essentially. But that's another franchise that, you would never, you could dabble around the edges in either case. But, I mean, some teams, like, why would, you just can't. Where's the Atlanta Hawks? But,
That's right, I have 100,000 questions, but I'm going to try and keep it tamped down for this last one. In terms of what you were saying earlier about the idea of kind of a little fix-up or a full tear-down in terms of the team, thinking about the Redskins and the Indians,
yes,
and St. John's in terms of Red Storm, which was the switchover, do you think it's possible for those teams to retain a sense of identity of the Redskins and Indian and cartoonish Indian logo, or does the whole thing need to go if the team opts to change its name? Just in terms of your sensibility.
No, I'll address Redskins because to me it's an easy one. If Daniel Snyder was in this room, right, this is what Redskins is a pejorative phrase.
Yeah.
I just think it's ugly and it's full of hatred. And that franchise has been down for years, right? If you were going to make a change like this, if you're a company, I don't care who you are, right? And you're pissing off a certain segment of your constituency, you really should think about maybe how to evolve your brand or pivot or whatever. So here's what I would say. I would say in the case of the Redskins, come up with some other color. You want red hawks, red feathers, I don't care what you call it, right? This is what I would say. I would say we are going to make a transition. It's going to take 3 years, 2-3 years. We're going to evolve into this new identity because we don't want to leave people behind who are people of good feeling who don't see what some other people might see within this. We are going to retain our burgundy heritage because it's a distinct connection that dates back, in their case, to 1937. So there's brand heritage there. And we want everybody to come aboard, and it's about the future, and we will honor those teams of the past that have won Super Bowls. And we're not going to ban the name necessarily, but we're not going to actively promote it any longer. I think there's a way forward. You know, colleges.
That's such a nice way. I feel like I think you should scrap that.
Tear the Band-Aid off and
Yes.
be done with it?
Yes, new name, new colors, new
Yeah, but you know, I
everything.
mean, I'm sure there, you know, and I actually know that. I know some who are Redskins fans who are, like I said, people of goodwill who, who are just
my
don't
view
get
is
it.
probably not realistic.
Yeah, and you know, and this
A
is
lot
it.
of colleges have done it, over a year, over years.
Stanford did it in
Stanford did it,
1969
exactly.
or something.
The Cardinal, University of Miami,
Yeah.
Miami of Ohio, St. John's.
Right, yeah, Miami of Ohio.
Syracuse to some degree, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a way forward with it, and again, there are varying degrees of. This really speaks to the fact that sports fans are, blinded by certain things. We are, so enamored of our teams and of our culture that sometimes it can get away in the way of judgment.
The Indians, they don't use that logo anymore, do they?
He is a sleeve patch, and
He
sleeve
is.
patch. He's also on the headwear for, I believe, home games only or road. I forget. He's on the headwear. He's on the sleeves. No longer the primary logo. C caps, C primary logo.
Yeah. That's a good question.
Yeah.
As far as, it kind of interests me the past couple of years, because as far as football helmets, I know, I saw the Maryland Terps, they had the Maryland flag actually, like on their helmet. Then you go to the Cleveland Browns.
Right.
They have an orange helmet. And I mean, where do you see, and even the Bengals, they have the crazy stripes.
Yeah.
So where do you see the friendly combination of tradition and then new school?
Yeah, that's
come
interesting.
together?
Hey, the Bengals, have had those since, for 30 years now.
Right.
I love them. I hate the uniforms, but I really love the helmets. Always have.
My high school was the Tigers, and that was our football helmet, and we definitely thought we were the coolest.
Yeah,
we talked about that.
Yeah, right.
People were envious of our helmets, for sure.
I can see why. Well, and my high school was the Indians. Roosevelt.
Oh, yes.
So, anyway, but the Browns are sort of, it was really, so anticipated. The Browns are going to change their logo. What are they going to do? Ultimately they go from one Pantone color to the next, and they do what they do with the uniforms, which I'm not going to get into because we don't have enough time. We might be here until 3 a.m. But, the Browns are sort of known for a tradition of having no logo. So I guess they settled in comfortably with that. I actually, real quick, I did the Bulldog logo that the Browns used up until this year. And the story with that is I used to have a Bulldog named Casey who would sit there and snore at my feet. And she was the model for the old Dog Pound logo. So there you go. And in case of Maryland, there's the college culture. They can do anything they want from 1 week to the next. And, you move on to the next thing.
Well, we've gone
Yeah, we
over
went over
the
time.
scheduled time already.
14th inning.
You guys were awesome. Todd, amazing.
Ben, thank you.
Thank you to Lynn and everyone else from Mitchell and Ness.